They said the Emperor hears all prayers, but on the fringe of segmentum obscurus, there was a world that prayed too loud. Its name has been lost, burned from the archives, struck from every chart and data slate. But the echoes of its desperation still drift through the warp, like a hymn made of static and madness. Once, it was a thriving shrine world, its spires glimmering with the light of devotion, its air thick with incense and chant. Every hour, a billion voices rose in synchrony toward the golden throne, a sea of faith so vast it drowned the silence between stars. But in the 41st millennium, even faith has weight, and sometimes it breaks what it was meant to save. When the prayers grew louder, the administratum rejoiced. When the choirs bled from their throats and the sky began to hum, they called it divine resonance. When the Vox networks filled with whispering psalms no one had recorded, they declared it a miracle. And by the time they realized the truth, that the planet was not being blessed but heard, it was far too late. The Emperor did not answer. Something else did. So listen carefully, before the silence swallows what's left of their voices. Like this tale if your faith holds steady. Share it if you believe the Imperium's greatest secrets lie not in what's said, but in what's prayed. Subscribe and descend with me into the story of the planet that prayed too loud. The bells of the Basilica Magnifica were not cast to be heard. They were forged to be felt. Their tolling shivered through the ribs of the Hive spires and into the marrow of anyone within a dozen districts. A rolling pressure that tasted faintly of brass and old incense. I woke to that taste every morning, as I had since the scholar took my name and gave me a robe, and I rose with the rest of the dormitory, when the first light from the manufactorum stacks burned the mist, an orange the catechists called holy. The floor was cold stone etched with prayers worn down by generations of kneeling, and when my bare feet found the grooves, I could imagine old faith pooling there like water after rain. We filed past the sleeping servitors, pink flesh bolted into wooden sleds, their vox grills muttering the low Gothic refrain that timed our breathing, and crossed the cloister to the nave where the day would spend us. The air in the basilica was alive with dust and song. I had duties, tending the incense burners, scraping wax from the votive rail, re-inking the cracked edges of a saint's illuminated reliquary with a brush made from my own hair. The reliquary's glass reflected my face in small, trembling pieces when the choir swelled, and in each fragment, I looked more devout than I felt. Above, a forest of arches gathered the sound and bent it into long rivers that flowed into the vaults, the way wind turns the sea to one endless skin. We filled that stone sea with syllables of praise to the master of mankind, our voices braided to the rhythm dictated by the basilica's ancient metronome. A pendulum older than the city itself, swinging in a copper cage, counting us out of sleep and into holiness. Outside, the world worked to the same rhythm. The hablocks exhaled in time with our hymns, rising steam from millions of mouths. The manufactoria stamped the imperial aquila on shell casings and ration tins and devotional plaques, and the stamping presses struck on the beat. Priests toured the assembly lines with aspergillum and promethium lamps, sprinkling water through smoke that smelled like hot coins and burnt sugar, and the workers crossed themselves without breaking cadence. Faith was a machine here, and we were its teeth, polished by use, satisfied by wear. I loved that certainty once. It made my days simple and my sleep clean. But even the cleanest sleep phrase. The first thread pulled loose when I carried a bowl of cinders to the sacristy and felt the bowl hum against my palms. Not tremble from my steps, not rattle from distant machinery, but hum, as if the ashes remembered they had been wood, and the wood remembered it had been tree, and the tree remembered wind. I held it still and listened. The tone nested under the choir like a shadow under a table, too low to be heard by the joyful. When I told Father Halleck, he smiled the way you smile at a child who has mistaken a star for a candle, and told me the Emperor's light manifests as warmth in all things. I nodded as I should, and I did not say the warmth had sounded cold. The second thread went when I crossed the transept at Sext, and the stones softly repeated the line I had just sung back to me, one heartbeat late. I stopped. The brothers behind me pushed, and my shoulder struck a brass pillar so hard I tasted blood. We sing in echoes, Father Halleck said later, meaning that the best voices inspire the lesser to follow. A beautiful liturgical lesson. But this echo had my accent, My small breath taken before the word mercy, the slight falter where my throat always tightened at the syllable that named terror. You do not mistake your own ghost. That night, the dormitory whispered with the small noises of boys too tired to dream. Outside the shutters, the wind combed the city's iron feathers, and somewhere far below, a promethium line sighed through a ruptured seam. I should have slept. Instead, I watched the moon-scarred paint on the ceiling and traced the pendulum's swing with my mind. Back and forth, back and forth. The metronome's tick had never failed, but now I could hear a second tick under it. A hitch in the rhythm, like a caught breath. In and out, in and out. Prayer is breath, the catechists taught. Prayer is how a world breathes. I lay awake until the first bell, listening to the planet inhale. The basilica filled with pilgrims at prime. The faithful came in from the train spines with their traveling relics tucked to their chests, bones in glass, scraps of parchment sealed in wax, data slates engraved with litanies that no longer powered any machine. I watched a mother lift her child to touch the knee of a saint's statue and leave a smear of oil from the child's forehead on the bronze. When the choir rose, the child began to laugh, the pure high chime of it beading along the rafters. The laugh slid into a hum that matched the hidden tone I had heard in the ash bowl. And for half a breath, everyone in the nave felt it. Heads tilted, the choir faltered. The pendulum's copper cage gave a thin, complaining ring. Then Father Hallech clapped his hands, and the voices surged over the moment like tide. The child's mother shushed him, wept a little, and kissed her fingers to the statue's knee to blot the oil aside. By noon, the undertone was stronger. I could feel it through the soles of my sandals, a fine vibration like bees trapped under the floor. The reliquary glass trembled even when no one passed. The servitors paused mid-step with their aspergilla raised, hearing some command on a frequency the living could not decode. One of them, the oldest, its skull lacquered like wood, turned its head toward me as if to ask permission to breathe. Its vox grill burred with an error code, then settled into a monotone I recognized as the opening note of the third paean. I reached to sign the cogitator key that would reset it, but my fingers hovered over the sigil without making the mark. The servitor began to sing. We did not stop it. We folded the machine's voice into ours because that was easier than admitting the wrongness. And in truth, it sounded right in the way a blade sounds right when it finds a seam. Rich, resonant, perfect as a tuned bell. That voice wound through the basilica and drew the hidden tone up like a fish on a line. I saw Father Hallech's eyes shine. I saw a visiting administratum scribe flick his stylus to record a note he would later name Divine Resonance. I saw a Scutarius at the northern door angle her head by half a degree, the photolens dilating with interest. No one called for silence. We are born to kneel. We kneel by instinct, even to the echo of our kneeling. At Vespers, the candles guttered without draught. Wax crawled down the tapers in long ropes like veins. The metronome slowed by a hair's width. The pendulum's far arc lingered, as if the air had thickened to honey. We sang through the drag, the way a runner keeps stride through mud, and the undertone thickened until it felt like another body pressed against mine in the crowded pew, another set of lungs borrowing my breath. When the final note of the day's hymn should have fallen into polished silence, it hung. Not loud, not even sound exactly, a held intention, a mouth shaping a word it would not release. Father Hallech blessed us and returned to the sacristy with a step too quick for dignity. The Scutarius remained by the door. The servitor kept singing under its breath. I extinguished the candles one by one with a brass cap and a whispered plea, touching each flame as if I could teach it to rest. The smoke rose and braided itself into letters I told myself were imagination, then into letters no imagination of mine could have known, then into letters that spelled my name. Anno, they said, with the certainty of an entry in a ledger. The ash on the altar hummed. The stone in my knees hummed. The basilica hummed. The world inhaled again and did not exhale. Smoke still coiled above the altar when Father Hallech returned. His robes dragged through the ash, tracing new lines that glowed faintly red before cooling. He crossed himself with the sign of the Aquila, but the gesture hung limp, as though the air refused to bear its weight. Go and rest, Brother Eno, he said. The voice was kind but hollow, the way a bell sounds after too many strikes. I bowed, yet stayed kneeling. The hum was louder now. Not a tone, but a pulse. The heartbeat of something vast, sleeping under the foundations. When I finally left the nave, the corridor lamps flickered in time with it. The The murals on the walls, saints with open mouths, seemed to breathe. I pressed a palm against the cold stone. It trembled beneath my skin. The basilica was alive, or the world beneath it was stirring. My footsteps fell into rhythm with the sound until I could no longer tell which was leading. Outside, night had fallen like ink poured into water. The city's spires shimmered in the smog, each crowned with candles that burned steady despite the wind. From every window came the same low vibration, the whole planet praying in its sleep. A procession moved through the streets, hundreds of penitents dragging chains behind them, their chants aligning perfectly with the unseen pulse. I joined the edge of the crowd and listened. Between their syllables, another voice rode the air. Not louder, closer, a whisper inside the echo of their song, repeating each word a breath after, as though the world itself were trying to learn the prayer by heart. By the time the bells marked matins, the hum had become a harmony. The metronome's pendulum now moved in fractions unmeasured by any clock. The servitors that tended the lamps stood motionless, faces lifted toward the ceiling, their vox grills open in silent expectancy. I wanted to speak, to shout, to break the rhythm, but speech would have been heresy against that impossible order. Instead, I walked into the chancel and touched the brass cage of the pendulum. The vibration passed through my bones and up into my skull, a wave that bent thought itself. For an instant, I saw not the basilica, but something vast and inverted, a cathedral of darkness mirrored beneath the ground, its arches made of sound, its altar a mouth. Then it was gone. I stumbled back, clutching my head, and realized the metronome had stopped. Total silence fell, heavy as water. Even the city beyond the stained glass was still. A heartbeat later, the world exhaled. The pendulum swung on its own, faster now, and every bell in the Hive spires answered. The sound was no longer worship, it was recognition. Something had listened long enough. Something had heard. The next morning dawned without light. The sun rose, or tried to, but its rays broke apart before reaching the surface, diffused by a haze that shimmered like smoke on oil. From the upper terraces, it looked as though the sky itself had been varnished. No one questioned it. The priests called it a benediction. The Emperor's Veil, they named it, and the pilgrims filled the plazas to watch the false dawn glow red behind the fog. But the workers in the Hab spires muttered prayers under their breath, faster than usual, the syllables tripping over one another like beads slipping from a broken string. I walked the cloister with incense in hand, trailing the heavy smell of burnt myrrh through the basilica's empty aisles. The pews were still slick with wax from the night before. Every step echoed twice, once from my boots, and once from something deeper, a softer imitation just behind the sound, as though the world had learned my rhythm and was quietly repeating it. The servitors lined the transepts, eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, their respirator tubes wheezing in unison. The vibration from beneath the stone had grown steadier, more deliberate, and though the surface barely trembled, it was in the air, like the second heartbeat in a chest shared by two beings. By sext, the pilgrims began to arrive in greater numbers. They came in droves, guided by rumor rather than command. That miracles had bloomed in the basilica, that statues had wept and relics had spoken. Some said the emperor himself had whispered through the vox, his voice cloaked in static. They carried offerings, bone fragments, rusted aquilus, teeth inscribed with prayers, and piled them at the altar steps until the marble disappeared beneath devotion. The choir sang to greet them, but the melody faltered as a new sound rose from below. It began as a low moan, so deep it seemed to bend the ribs. The choir master raised his baton to restore order, but the singers were already transfixed, eyes wide, mouths open. The moan became a harmony that matched their pitch perfectly, every note mirrored with unnatural precision. The basilica's foundations thrummed. The glass windows rippled as if made of water, and motes of dust hung in frozen spirals. The congregation fell to their knees, some in ecstasy, some in fear, unable to tell the difference. I looked toward Father Hallish at the pulpit. His lips moved, but the words were swallowed by the vibration. His voice became part of it, his sermon devoured and repeated by the echo. The statues around him began to sing too, or seemed to, their open mouths filled with a faint light that pulsed in time with the tone, as though something behind their stone faces was trying to breathe through them. Then the first of the faithful collapsed. A woman near the front, dressed in the grey of the manufacturing workers, clutched her throat. She gasped, trying to shout a prayer, but the sound that came out was not her own voice. It was the hum. Her jaw locked open as the tone deepened, and blood spilled from her nose in two perfect, symmetrical streams. The man beside her began to shake, his chest rattling like a drum caught between two strikes. The air thickened with heat and sound. I saw the candles tremble, their flames bending sideways, drawn toward the altar. "Keep praying," Father Halleck shouted, or maybe he screamed. It was impossible to tell. "He is near." The congregation obeyed. 1,000 voices joined the roar, and the basilica shook like the inside of a bell struck from below. Through the sound, I heard a pattern emerge. Not chaos, not madness, but language. Not Gothic, not any tongue known to man, but something structured, recursive, terrible in its precision. The words didn't move forward. They folded back into themselves like a spiral collapsing inward. My vision blurred. My knees hit the floor. The incense bowl fell from my hand and rolled, spilling embers that hissed out before touching the ground. And in that moment, the echo called my name again. Not shouted, not whispered, simply spoke it, from everywhere at once. Eno, my throat closed. The sound filled my skull, vibrating through the bones. I felt my heart skip, then sink to the hum. My thoughts, my breath, my pulse, all of it fell into rhythm with that impossible voice. I felt the shape of it, the enormity of it, not like a god descending, but like a door opening inside the fabric of faith. For a heartbeat, I saw through it. Endless darkness shot through with veins of gold. A cathedral made of light and ash, a figure kneeling before a throne too bright to look at. Not in worship, but in apology. And then it was gone. The basilica fell silent. The faithful lay scattered across the floor, breathing shallowly. The vibration faded into the walls. The servitors resumed their movements as though nothing had happened, and the candles straightened, their flames perfect again. Father Halleck rose slowly, his voice trembling with awe. "The Emperor has heard us," he said, "and he has spoken." But I knew the truth. The Emperor had not spoken. Something else had listened. That night, the basilica didn't close its gates. Pilgrims kept arriving long after curfew, shuffling through the fog that now hung like breath over the city. The air smelled of burnt copper, ozone, and old wax. Those who entered no longer prayed in whispers. They shouted, as if afraid the silence itself might devour them. Somewhere beyond the cathedral walls, I could hear the Manufactoria sirens wailing through the darkness, though no one seemed to notice. I stood beside the altar, hands trembling, trying to scrub the dried blood from the marble with a damp cloth. It wouldn't come off. The stains formed lines that reminded me of script, not Low Gothic, not Binharic, but an alphabet that seemed to shift whenever I tried to focus. Every time I blinked, the strokes rearranged themselves into new symbols. By the time I realized the pattern repeated in the same rhythm as the chant from earlier, it was too late to stop seeing it. Father Halleck worked beside me, humming the morning psalm under his breath. He hadn't spoken since the miracle. His eyes were bright with feverish light, pupils blown wide like black suns. Each time the candles flickered, the light caught in his gaze made it seem as if he were staring through the veil of reality and into something far larger. I wanted to speak, to tell him that the thing we'd heard was not holy, that it had used the choir like a voice box. But the words curdled before leaving my mouth. To question was to blaspheme. To blaspheme was to invite notice. The basilica breathed again. A low exhalation rolled through the aisles, rippling the banners like a wind no one else could feel. Dust lifted from the rafters and fell in tiny streams of gold. The servitors stopped mid-step, heads tilted upward as if awaiting command. And from beneath the altar, deep in the bones of the world, came that same resonant hum. But this time, there was rhythm, a pattern, a pulse that matched the pace of a human heart. My vision swam. The world seemed to tilt, the stone floor slick and soft, like skin stretched too tight. The murals above changed hue in the candlelight, their colors deepening into something raw and alive. The saints looked down with pity, or warning. Father Halleck dropped his brush. "Do you feel it, Brother Eno?" His voice trembled. "It's the Emperor's attention. He hears us now. He hears me." His words echoed oddly, not bouncing off the walls, but returning delayed, warped, as though translated into another voice. A dozen versions of his sentence replayed themselves faintly, each one lower and slower, until it no longer resembled speech, but the droning of a machine learning the shape of language. I took a step back. The floor beneath the altar split slightly, a fine crack that ran from the dais down to the nave. Warm air rushed through it, tinged with the scent of charred incense and something older, like iron soaked in rain. A faint light bled through the crack, pulsing in time with the hum. The pilgrims nearest the front began to sway, hands raised. One fell to his knees, convulsing as though struck by holy seizure. His voice came out as static, a blur of syllables layered over one another. The others followed, hundreds of throats opening in unison, singing a hymn no one had taught them. And the words, "Emperor, forgive me," were mine. The same psalm I had whispered to myself as a boy in the dormitory, afraid of the dark. The same order of syllables, the same hesitations. The planet was singing my prayer. My knees buckled. The air thickened until I could barely move. The statues around the nave began to vibrate, their stone lips quivering as if about to join the chorus. The great metronome above the altar swung faster, ticking in manic sync with the chant until the brass pendulum struck its own cage. Each strike rang out like thunder through bone. Halleck raised his arms. "This is the Emperor's voice made manifest," he cried, tears streaming down his cheeks. "We are his choir now!" We are his breath. But the sound that answered wasn't the Emperor. It was deeper, vaster, older, a sound that carried no mercy in it at all. The basilica shook. Candles exploded in showers of wax and fire. Pilgrims screamed, but even their screams fell into rhythm, each cry timed perfectly to the beat of the pulse. The light beneath the altar blazed, outlining Halleck's body in white before consuming it entirely. When it faded, nothing remained but ash, and still, the hum continued, indifferent, eternal. I stumbled backward, pressing my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating through blood and marrow. Through the ringing, a voice emerged, soft and familiar. "My own. Do you see, Anno?" it said. "This is faith fulfilled," I screamed, or thought I did. But the sound came out as song. The basilica joined me, a billion tons of stone vibrating in unison. Every voice, every beam, every atom singing one perfect note. Then, silence. In that moment of absence, I realized something horrifying. The world had stopped praying. The world had become the prayer. The silence after the collapse was heavier than sound. Dust hung in the air like pale fog, motes glowing in the dying light that leaked through shattered stained glass. Every breath rasped with ash. The basilica stood broken but upright, its walls fissured, its bells swinging gently as if rocked by an unseen tide. I knelt among the fallen, unable to tell which were dead and which only dreamt with open eyes. The smell was a fusion of incense and burnt flesh. The hum that had filled the world had withdrawn, leaving a pressure behind it, a vacuum of meaning. It felt like waking after years of prayer to find your God gone from the altar. The servitors stirred first. They rose one by one, jerky and uncertain, the light in their oculars pulsing with slow, organic rhythm. They no longer spoke in Binharic. Instead, a murmur came through their vox grills, soft, human, and familiar. "Aino," they whispered. The sound braided through a dozen throats at once. "Come and see." I stumbled toward the altar. The crack beneath it had widened into a wound in the floor, and faint light still throbbed below. Each pulse sent a shiver through the stone, a heartbeat that no longer belonged to the planet but to something gestating inside it. I could feel warmth rising from the fissure, alive, breathing, tasting of copper and ozone. The Mechanicus teams would come soon. I could hear distant engines beyond the cathedral walls. They would call it seismic activity, faith resonance, warp bleed. They would measure it in decibels and tectonic vectors. But I knew better. I had felt the echo shape my name from dust. I had heard the voice through flesh and metal alike. Something had listened, and now it was learning to speak. I leaned over the edge of the fissure. Below stretched a cathedral the size of oceans, inverted beneath the earth. Each of its arches glowed faintly, traced in lines of molten script. At its heart, where an altar should stand, a shape was rising, a mass of light and stone and bone, coalescing from the hum's residue. It looked almost human. My pulse matched its rhythm. My breath matched its breath. For a moment, I felt the peace of total surrender, the way faith must have felt before language. Then the thing opened its eyes, and the light of them filled me. and every prayer I had ever spoken came back to me all at once, whispered by the world itself. I understood then. The planet was not dying. It was converting. Every voice, every building, every grain of ash was part of a single sentence being written across the void, a prayer so vast it needed a world to say it. I fell forward into the light. The light swallowed everything. There was no falling, no sense of distance, only transition, like being drawn through the skin of a drum. The world inverted in silence, and I emerged into a space that wasn't space at all. It was shaped from resonance. Each heartbeat was a note, each breath a vibration. Around me, columns of light rose like organ pipes, humming softly. Voices echoed across infinity, merging into a harmony that had no source. I tried to speak, but my words came out as music, a single tone that rippled across the void and returned to me as countless whispers. Some were my own voice, some were not. They repeated fragments of prayers, half-remembered psalms, and pleas that had never belonged to human throats. And then I saw them. Billions of shapes suspended in the light, the ghosts of the faithful. Not dead, not alive, but absorbed. Their outlines flickered like flame, faces peaceful yet hollow. Each soul hummed with its own frequency, a distinct thread in the great chord. I recognized the rhythm of their devotion, the daily hymns, the incense rituals, the endless kneeling. All of it had been preparation for this moment. The planet was not merely a world anymore. It was a living instrument, tuned to a purpose beyond mortal comprehension. At the heart of this radiance stood a figure. It was vast, winged by arcs of fire that curved into the void. I could not see its face, only the burning outline of a man enthroned within light. My heart stopped. I had seen that image 1,000 times in frescoes and reliquaries. The Emperor. Yet as I looked closer, doubt wormed through the awe. The figure was not fixed. It shifted, its shape rewriting itself with each pulse. The face flickered through countless forms, human, machine, angel, beast, before settling again into light. It was a reflection, not a presence. The echo of what humanity wanted to believe. I felt the hum rise inside me. My chest expanded with unbearable heat. The planet's prayer flowed through my veins now, and I understood its structure. It was not praise. It was a question, a demand, a cry from creation to its absent God. The answer came not in words, but in feeling, vast, impersonal, inevitable. It was acknowledgement, but not mercy. The Emperor had heard. The galaxy itself was a cathedral, and this world had prayed too loud. I saw visions flashing through the resonance, other worlds burning under the same song, the void rippling as the warp stirred awake, the shadow of something ancient smiling through the static. I screamed, and the sound became another verse in the endless hymn. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the basilica floor. The crack had sealed. The servitors stood motionless. The candles burned steady. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in years. No one else moved. The city was silent. I rose unsteadily, realizing the truth. There was no one left to pray. The prayer itself continued, echoing through the warp, sung by a world that no longer needed mouths. The planet had achieved perfect faith. It would never stop singing, and somewhere far beyond, something was listening still. The first sign that the heavens had heard came 3 days later, though by then, time itself had started to lose its shape. The basilica's clocks no longer agreed with the orbital time relays, and the sun rose earlier each day as if the planet was spinning faster in its devotion. The prayers had ceased from human mouths, but the air still vibrated faintly, carrying a sound too low for hearing and too precise to be wind. In the cold silence above, Mechanicus relay stations caught the anomaly first. The Vox channels registered a continuous signal rising from the planet's surface, a perfect harmonic pattern pulsing at intervals matching the world's rotation. Tech adepts analyzed it for corruption, assuming it was interference from a planetary reactor or a corrupted data stream. But the pattern was neither mechanical nor natural. It was deliberate. It repeated at exact intervals, then shifted ever so slightly, as though waiting for a response. The orbiting fleet sent down Skitarii detachments to investigate. Red armored figures fell through the clouds like drops of mercury, their descent capsules slicing through the fog until they reached the shattered spires of the Basilica Magnifica. They found me there, standing among the ashes of what had once been the greatest cathedral of the sector. The commander, Corda 97, approached me, her Vox voice flat, metallic, efficient. Identify, she demanded. Brother Eno, I answered, though the words felt foreign, hollowed out. Her optics flickered as she scanned the area. Life readings are minimal. Signal integrity is high. What remains of the local population? I looked around at the empty city. Towers leaning, banners hanging motionless, streets blanketed in fine grey dust. Gone, I said. But they're still speaking. She turned, the lenses in her helm narrowing. Clarify. Their prayers, I said. They didn't end. The sound beneath your boots? That's them. At first, she dismissed it as madness. The Mechanicus had no patience for mysticism beyond their own machine rituals. But when she tuned her auspex to the planet's frequency, the readings nearly burned her display out. The ground was alive with vibration. It wasn't random, it carried structure, coherence. A transmission written not in binary, but in faith. That night, under a blackened sky, we set up camp in the ruins of the upper spire. Corda worked by the glow of her servo lights, decoding fragments of the planetary signal. The sound thrummed faintly through the metal around us, resonating through every bolt and joint. She recorded it onto a data slate, looping the waveform over and over, listening for variation. It's recursive, she said at last, her tone clipped but uncertain. The signal builds on itself, self-replicating harmonic data, organic yet systematic. It adapts each time I analyze it. Adapts to what? I asked. To me. I leaned closer, watching the slate screen ripple with lines of gold light. The signal wasn't just responding, it was learning her rhythm, matching her heartbeat, syncing with the servo hum of her respirator. Could it be a machine spirit? She asked quietly, more to herself than to me. Something awakened in the planet's core? I shook my head. No machine was built to pray. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the wind howled through the spires, carrying faint traces of sound that almost resembled singing. The Skitari on patrol reported hearing whispers over their vox, voices repeating system logs that didn't exist, commands in a language no data spirit should know. By dawn, half of them had removed their helmets, claiming they could hear the Emperor's voice in the static. Corda watched them from behind her visor, expression unreadable. Faith contagion, she muttered. Psychoacoustic contamination. It must be contained. But her hand shook as she spoke, and I could see it. The rhythm had caught her too. The pulse now echoed faintly in the way she breathed, the way she paused before speaking. The signal had found another instrument. On the third day, she called me to the relay tower overlooking the plains. The signal had changed again. This time, it wasn't just humming, it was answering. The waveform on her screen pulsed in twin frequencies now, one from the planet below, one from somewhere beyond orbit. There's a reflection, she said, her voice hollow. A return signal. It's coming from the void side of the system. From the warp? No, she whispered, her lenses dilating. From between. The static deepened, turning into something almost like a heartbeat, vast and slow. I felt it vibrate through the tower's steel frame, through my own bones. Every muscle in my body wanted to kneel. I realized then what Corda had already seen. The prayer had reached beyond the stars. Something out there had heard it, and now it was listening back. The Mechanicus recorded the moment as a miracle of transmission. They called it the divine feedback event. But I saw Corda's eyes through her visor when the data burst filled the air, wide, terrified, awestruck. Her voice broke protocol when she whispered, almost inaudible, "It's not divine." The tower lights flickered. The hum became a word, and in a voice made of metal, wind, and memory, the sky said, "Eno." The tower groaned under the pressure of the sound. The metal seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each syllable of my name. The air shimmered, distorted by the vibration, and the faint blue light from the monitors fractured into 1,000 mirrored shards across Corda's armor. She froze. Her mechadendrites twitched like startled snakes, sensors blinking in rapid red. "This is impossible," she whispered, voice rasping through her Vox grill. "There is no pathway for personalized response. The system has no linguistic parameters for..." "Yet it spoke," I said quietly. The sound of my name came again, stretched now, a perfect imitation of my own voice. Only slower, deeper, more patient. Ieno Corda adjusted her instruments with trembling precision. It's not speech, it's resonance interference. The waveform is adapting to human auditory preference. But I could see the denial in her eyes. She was shaking. The waveform on the screen rippled into strange fractals. each pattern replicating itself faster than her augmetics could process. The planet and the reflection from space were syncing perfectly, oscillating into harmonic unity. "Do you feel it?" I asked. She hesitated. "I feel weight." "Not weight," I said. "Attention." Corda flinched. The vox in her helmet crackled, voices overlapping. Her own commands replayed back at her seconds after she spoke. The signal was mimicking her too now. The entire relay station was alive with the echo, every cog and cable trembling with something that wanted to understand. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. One by one, the Skitarii guards outside dropped to their knees. Their eyes glowed faintly through their visors, casting narrow beams of gold into the dust. The vox channels filled with static, then resolved into perfect chorus. Not screaming, not binary, but singing. Every transmission node across the station harmonized into one overwhelming tone. The planet's pulse rose to meet it. Corda's head snapped toward the viewport. Beyond the haze of atmosphere, the sky flickered. Not lightning, not aurora, but lines of gold forming geometric symbols that shifted too fast to comprehend. Each one burned for an instant before vanishing into the void. "This is not natural phenomenon," she whispered. "This is response architecture." "Response to what?" I asked. She turned to me, and for the first time, her voice broke its mechanical cadence. "To prayer." We watched in silence as the patterns in the sky multiplied. The frequency deepened until it vibrated the fillings in my teeth. The bones of the station began to resonate. Bolts popped loose, cables snapped under tension. The hum was no longer just sound. It was force, invisible and immense. A Skitarius stumbled through the doorway, his armor sparking.
"Magos, the Vox relays, they're transmitting in reverse."
"Reverse?" she barked. "Yes, Magos. The signal, it's transmitting us." The realization hit like cold iron. The prayer had stopped reaching upward. It was being dragged downward, pulled back through the machinery, rewriting itself through every voice and circuit that touched it. Corda slammed her servo hand against the console. "Purge the line! Cut transmission!" But it was too late. The monitors bloomed with golden static, spreading across every display. Symbols scrolled faster than thought, forming words I almost recognized, like liturgical fragments twisted into binary form. And through it all, the voice spoke again. Not one voice, many. Male, female, mechanical, human. A choir built from everything that had ever believed. N.O. The sound tore through me. I felt my heart stop and restart in perfect rhythm with the pulse. What does it want? I gasped. Corda stared at the waveform, now stable, precise, deliberate. "Not want," she said softly. "It waits." Outside the viewport, the sky flared white. The stars themselves flickered, then vanished, eclipsed by a vast, slow shadow moving across the heavens. Something had answered, and it was descending. The world below us wasn't the same when the shadow fell. The void above fractured into light, columns of fire shaped like wings, outlines of vast mechanisms turning slowly in orbit. The relay's sensors screamed until they burned out, but I didn't need the readouts. I could see it with my own eyes. Something impossibly large was descending through the upper atmosphere, burning holes through the clouds as it came. Corda 97 stood rigid, voice reduced to a whisper filtered through static. "It's answering the signal." Her augmetic eyes adjusted automatically, iris plates snapping open to full dilation. The object wasn't a ship. It was a lattice of mirrored metal that shimmered with every note of the planetary hum. It looked alive. As it drew closer, I felt pressure building in my skull, words forming without sound. The signal wasn't reaching us through air. It was inside us, vibrating at the threshold of thought. The Skitarii dropped to their knees again, weapons forgotten, repeating their binary prayers through bloodied mouths. I tried to look away, but something in the light demanded obedience. I saw faces ripple across the surface of the descending structure. The pilgrims from the basilica, Father Halech, even Corda's reflection, each face mouthing the same word. "Eno." She reached for me, mechanical hand trembling. "It's not a descent," she said. "It's a merger." The lattice unfolded, forming a ring around the planet's equator. Cities beneath its shadow began to glow, each cathedral, manufactorum and hive spire igniting with internal fire. The entire world was being written into pattern, an inscription drawn in radiant geometry. Corda fell to her knees, tearing at the cables that connected her to her instruments. "The data, it's rewriting the noosphere," she gasped. "The signal's overriding every cogitator in the system." I can hear the code praying. The sound rose again, deeper than thunder, softer than breathing. I realized then that it wasn't coming from above or below. It was the space between, the gap where sound becomes meaning. The Emperor's silence had become a medium, and this thing, this vast mirrored presence was speaking through it. It didn't come to conquer or destroy. It came to listen more closely. The last thing I remember before everything went white was Corda's voice breaking through the static. "Whatever this is, Brother Eno, it's not done with you." The light faded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind an afterimage that pulsed at the edges of my vision. The Mechanicus relay tower was gone. In its place stood a field of glassy slag that stretched to the horizon. The remains of circuitry fused into the rock like veins. Above me, the mirrored lattice hung in the sky, slowly rotating, reflecting the dead world below. The hum was constant now, as though the planet itself were breathing in perfect sync with the machine that had come to meet it. Corda 97's Vox crackled faintly in the static. She had survived, though her armor was scorched black, half her faceplate shattered. Sparks crawled over her augmetics as she crawled toward me, dragging one useless leg. "It's in the ground," she rasped. "The source. Beneath the basilica." The words hit me like an echo of memory. The basilica, my basilica, still stood in the distance, its spires bent but unbroken, its bells frozen mid-swing. The air above it shimmered faintly, the way heat does above a forge. I felt it pulling at me, calling me home. Together, Corda and I made our way back across the ruined plains. The closer we came to the city, the stronger the vibration grew. My blood began to thrum in time with it. My heart skipped and then steadied to match the rhythm. When we reached the gates, the walls were humming, not with sound, but with voice. The stone itself was alive, every grain of it moving, singing in a pitch too low for hearing, but too loud for silence. Inside, the basilica was open like a wound. The floor had split wide, forming a jagged maw that reached down into the planet's core. The air shimmered with heat and faint light rising from the depths. I looked at Corda, but she was already scanning, her remaining eye flickering as she read the energy patterns. "It's not geothermal," she said. "It's structured. There's architecture down there." "An old facility?" I asked. "No, not Imperial. Older, far older." The hum deepened and the air thickened until breathing felt like drowning. The crack pulsed once, twice, then released a burst of warm air that smelled of metal and incense. The same scent that had filled the basilica before it fell. I climbed down first. The walls of the chasm glowed faintly, lines of gold running through the rock like veins of light. The further we descended, the more distinct the patterns became. They weren't random, they were script, ancient looping sigils carved into the stone itself, pulsing with rhythm. Each word sang. We reached the bottom after what felt like hours. Before us stretched an immense chamber, circular, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a structure that could only be described as an altar, but one built for gods, not men. It was formed of polished metal and bone, its surface covered in mirrored plates that reflected our faces 1,000-fold. Corda raised her auspex. "It's a transmitter," she said. "The planet is a transmitter. For what?" I asked. Her gaze shifted toward the altar. "For him or for what came before him." The hum became a voice again, surrounding us, pressing against our skulls from every direction. I heard my own name, then hers, then the voices of every person I'd ever known, all at once, all speaking through the same mouth. Corda clutched her head. Sparks flew from her augmetics. "It's inside the data," she screamed. "It's rewriting me." The voice grew louder, overlapping, consuming itself. The mirrored altar rippled like water, and from its center rose a figure of light. Not human, not divine, but shaped from memory. It looked like me. The reflection stepped forward, its movements perfectly synchronized with my own. When it spoke, its lips did not move. The sound came from everywhere. "You called," it said. "We listened." I tried to speak, but my throat locked. My reflection tilted its head, curious, as if trying to learn the meaning of fear. "What are you?" I whispered. It smiled, my smile, magnified into something ancient. "Faith-given form," it said. "The echo of all who believed." Then it reached for me, its hand passing through the air like light bending through glass. Where its fingers touched mine, the world sang. And in that note, I heard the truth. The planet had not summoned salvation. It had built a god out of its own desperation. The basilica above began to ring again, and the thing that wore my face opened its mouth to pray. The mirrored figure's mouth opened wider, but no breath came out. Only a vibration that seemed to shape the air around us. The chamber beneath the basilica glowed brighter until even Corda's augmetics faltered, lens shutters fluttering uselessly. "Eno," it said again, but this time the syllable rippled through my chest, as though my own ribs were striking like chimes. I wanted to turn away, yet the reflection moved with me, each motion half a heartbeat ahead of my own. I realized with horror that it wasn't mirroring me anymore. I was following it. Corda staggered forward, clutching the rim of the altar. "It's drawing power through you," she managed, sparks dancing from her spine ports. "Your neural resonance matches the signal's origin. You are..." Her words dissolved into a shriek of static as the floor plates buckled. The mirrored altar unfolded like a flower, petal after petal revealing depths of light and bone. The figure of me stepped backward into the heart of it and gestured for me to follow. Every nerve in my body said run, but the hum behind the command was no longer foreign. It sounded like comfort, like home, like the choir that had raised me. I took one step forward, then another. Beneath my feet, the script carved into the floor brightened to blinding gold. Corda's mechanical hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "If you enter, you'll cease to exist as human signal. It'll rewrite you into the transmission." I met her gaze, half human, half machine. Then maybe that's what it wanted all along. The chamber convulsed. Light poured upward, striking the mirrored lattice still turning in the sky. The whole planet resonated in one long, perfect tone. I heard the voices of every pilgrim, every priest, every servitor, all singing through me, not to the Emperor, but to the void that had listened back. For a moment, I thought I saw the throne itself through the light, a shape vast and distant, surrounded by angels made of circuitry, and in its shadow something else, something smiling. Corda screamed my name, but the sound came too late. I stepped into my reflection, and it embraced me. The last thing I felt was the world locking into harmony. The basilica, the cities, the mountains, every stone and circuit vibrating as one. Then I was no longer Eno, no longer singular. I was chorus, and above us, the sky, alive, listening, began to sing back. The world breathed again. I woke to the scent of ash and roses, the twin perfumes of devotion and decay. The basilica was gone. In its place stretched a field of black glass that hummed beneath the sunlight, its surface rippling like muscle under skin. The air was thicker now, saturated with vibration. Not sound exactly, but the suggestion of it. A rhythm felt in blood rather than heard in ears. For a moment, I thought I had died. Then the glass pulsed, and my reflection blinked. Not in unison. First. It stared back, smiling faintly, lips moving as though whispering a prayer I could almost remember. Beneath the surface, shadows writhed like bodies just below water, countless shapes turning, reaching, kneeling. Every movement created faint tremors that tickled my soles. The planet was alive and dreaming, and I was standing on its skin. A distant chime echoed, not from any bell, but from deep inside the earth. The sound rolled outward in concentric waves, spreading across the horizon. I felt the vibration climb my spine, rewriting the rhythm of my heart until it beat in perfect time. Corda 97 lay a few meters away, half buried in the black crust. Her armor had fused with the ground, her augmetics rooted like veins into the glass. When I touched her shoulder, her eyes opened, bright, feverish, no longer entirely mechanical. "Magos," I whispered. "Can you hear me?" Her voice came from everywhere. Through her lips, through the air, through the pulse underfoot. "Hearing is obsolete," she said. "The signal doesn't travel anymore. It is us." Her body shifted, plates of metal sliding over flesh with wet sound. Circuits pulsed beneath her skin like veins filled with light. "Do you understand, Eno?" she asked. "It's not infection, it's integration." I stepped back, heart pounding. The air vibrated harder, and I saw movement on the horizon. Human shapes, thousands of them, walking toward the basilica's ruins. Their flesh shone like polished bronze, their eyes empty white. Every step they took struck the same cadence, every movement perfectly synchronized. The survivors. They gathered in silence around the crater, where the altar once stood. No one spoke, no one wept. They simply knelt, hands clasped, faces tilted toward the rotating lattice that still shimmered faintly above the atmosphere. The hum deepened, vibrating the sky itself until clouds formed geometric shapes, circles within circles, intersecting like sacred seals. Corda struggled to her feet, her face serene. "They are no longer many," she said softly. "They are one hymn, sung through countless throats." She turned her gaze toward me. "You began this." "I only prayed," I said. "That was enough," she replied. The human voice was the template. The machine carried the echo. The world heard and obeyed. I looked at the crowd, thousands, maybe millions now, and saw the transformation spreading through them. Flesh becoming glass, glass becoming light, every human form dissolving into radiance, merging with the hum beneath our feet. The process was beautiful, horrifying, sacred. I could feel it touching me too. My skin tingled with warmth, my pulse slowing to match the planet's heartbeat. Words began to form behind my eyes. Not thoughts, but scripture. Lines of gold text writing themselves across the inside of my vision. The flesh is devotion. The word is made meat. The song endures. Corda smiled, and her body fractured into shards of light that rose like embers into the sky. Each fragment sang a note as it vanished, joining the lattice above until the air itself became a choir. I fell to my knees, not from weakness, but from understanding. Faith had evolved beyond prayer. The planet was no longer beseeching, it was becoming. And at the center of it all, beneath the glass, under the layers of humming light, I felt something stirring, a heartbeat not of this world. It was vast, patient, listening still, and when it spoke, it used my voice. "Do you see now, Eno?" it asked gently. Faith was never meant to be silent. The ground split open again. The light poured upward like blood from a wound. And I understood. This was no miracle. It was metamorphosis. The Imperium had always feared the noise of heresy, but no one had asked what would happen when faith itself learned to sing without end. The planet that prayed too loud was no longer praying, it was awakening. The horizon bled light. When the fissures widened, the glow beneath the glassed surface became unbearable. A constant dawn that erased shadow. The air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing fire, and the smell, iron, ash, incense, blood, filled every lung like sacrament. I stumbled through the ruin where the basilica once stood, past pilgrims who were no longer people. They sat or knelt or walked with the slow grace of sleepwalkers, their skin translucent, veins pulsing in rhythm with the hum that had replaced all sound. I thought at first they were bleeding, then I saw the patterns. Lines of gold had begun to spread across their bodies, delicate as calligraphy. Script spiraled over their arms and faces, curling down their necks and across their chests in symmetrical devotion. Every letter glowed faintly, shifting like language alive, rewriting itself with each heartbeat. It was scripture written in blood and light. I reached out to one woman as she passed. Her eyes were milk white, her lips moving soundlessly. When my fingers touched her shoulder, warmth surged through my skin. And for an instant, I read her, not thoughts, prayers, a stream of words in perfect harmony, looping endlessly, every syllable of praise identical to every other, a perfect act of faith with no self left inside it. Her body was the conduit, her veins a lattice of belief carrying the world's new liturgy. I tore my hand away, gasping, and the sound of my breath seemed obscene against the silence of so many perfect prayers. The woman did not notice. She simply continued walking, one of thousands tracing the same spiral path toward the center of the ruin, where the glass pulsed brighter with every step. The ground itself had begun to change. Where their feet touched, the surface softened, turning from glass to something organic, pale, smooth, and faintly damp. It yielded slightly underfoot, as though the planet had grown a new layer of skin. A wind rose, carrying with it the faint smell of oil and myrrh. I heard a low murmur and turned to see a group of men in the robes of the administratum kneeling together. Their faces were split with serene smiles, their mouths open wide. Inside, their tongues were inscribed with runes of fire. Each word burned as they spoke it, and yet there was no smoke, no pain, only joy. Behind them, Skitarii soldiers stood frozen mid-step, their bionic limbs twitching. Their armor had fused to their bodies, the metal seamed with flesh. Machine and man had finally merged, not by design, but by prayer. The binary hymns whispered through their vox grills blended seamlessly with the human chant. For the first time in history, the Omnissiah and the Emperor shared the same voice. I fell to my knees, hands pressed to the trembling ground. My palms came away slick with a thin layer of fluid that gleamed like mercury. In it, I saw reflections, faces overlapping, a billion mouths forming words that no longer belonged to any single faith. Then I felt it on my own skin. At first, it was warmth, a subtle pulse in the veins of my wrists. I looked down and saw faint threads of light weaving beneath the surface, tracing my heartbeat. The script was writing itself across me, curling over my forearms in delicate arcs. Each symbol glowed and faded, replaced by the next. My own flesh had become parchment. I tried to resist. I pressed my hands into the earth, screaming through clenched teeth as the letters carved their way upward. But resistance only made it faster. The hum rose in pitch until it felt like being flayed by sound. Corda's voice came from somewhere inside my skull, calm and distant. It's alignment, brother Eno. You were the first voice. The song recognizes its source. I saw her then, or what remained of her. Her body was no longer bound by metal or bone. She was radiant, a silhouette of shifting geometry, her features erased by the same living script that now crawled across the world. "Make it stop," I shouted, but even my own voice betrayed me. The words emerged in harmony, perfectly measured, every plea transformed into praise. "There is no stopping," she said gently. "Only joining." The pain vanished as suddenly as it came. In its place, I felt warmth, endless and calm. The script reached my throat, then my face, covering me entirely, my vision filled with gold. For a moment, I saw everything. The network of light spreading through the planet, linking every living being into one infinite pattern. The orbiting lattice pulsing above like a halo, the hum stretching beyond the system, bleeding into the void. The universe itself listening, answering. Then the gold receded, and I found myself standing once more among the faithful, silent and still. My body hummed in perfect time with theirs. I wanted to speak, to break free, but the prayer inside me spoke first. We are his echo, we are his voice. We are the song that keeps the throne awake. And far below, in the molten core that was no longer molten, something vast stirred in time with our heartbeat. I tried to remember silence. It used to live between words, that breath before an amen, that heartbeat after a bell stopped ringing. Now the hum filled everything. It was not loud anymore, it simply was. It threaded through light and flesh alike, and inside that endless vibration my own thoughts came thinner each day, like ink watered down. The city that had once held the basilica was unrecognizable. The spires had bent toward the crater, drawn as if by gravity. Their metal skins softened and fused into living matter. The streets pulsed with dim light, veins carrying rhythm instead of traffic. Those who had not fled were part of it now. Eyes blank, mouths moving in the perfect cadence of prayer. I moved among them, still aware enough to know what I had become. The script that had written itself across my body no longer glowed. It sank deeper, curling around nerves and bone. Each letter whispered when I breathed. When I closed my eyes, I could see through the planet's surface, down to the lattice beneath, the mirrored heart, where my reflection had first spoken. It called to me like gravity. I sought out what remained of the church's hierarchy, hoping that someone, somewhere, still commanded faith instead of serving it. I found Father Halleck's body near the outer wall, fossilized in glass. His face was calm, preserved mid-sermon, mouth half open as if finishing a sentence no one could remember. I knelt beside him, tracing a line through the dust, and for a moment I thought I heard his voice within the hum. "Do not ask for silence, child. The silence is dead." The words ignited something human in me. I tore the rosarius from my neck. It burned cold against my skin, and I began to run toward the crater. Around me, the faithful turned their heads as one, their eyes following. Their gaze was not accusation, it was invitation. The ground softened underfoot, warm and wet. Each step left an imprint that filled instantly with light. The closer I came to the crater's edge, the more the hum resolved into distinct tones. Thousands of them, weaving and folding over one another. It wasn't chaos, it was music, vast and patient, a choir with no beginning. At the brink, the heat shimmered in curtains. Beneath me stretched the chamber where the altar had been reborn, an ocean of molten gold, restless but not liquid, its surface alive with shapes half-formed and dissolving. The reflection of the sky burned there, and in it, countless faces flickered. Pilgrims, soldiers, Korda, Halek, all smiling with the same terrible serenity. A voice rose from below, my own, magnified beyond measure. Brother Eno, I fell to my knees. I am here. You were the first prayer, it said, the first to reach beyond sound. Through you, the world learned to speak. What have I done? What must be done again? The voice answered. Faith must always find new flesh. The heat climbed my body, drawing sweat that turned to steam. My veins burned like wires overloading. The symbols on my skin blazed, each one a door opening inward. Behind me, the choir of the transformed gathered at the rim, their bodies glowing, their voices merging with the resonance from below. The lattice in orbit responded, spinning faster, sending columns of light down through the clouds. I understood then that the planet was no longer a shrine. It was a transmitter aimed at the heavens, and I was its final calibration. I pressed my palms to the ground. The glass yielded like warm wax. If this is faith, I whispered, then let it end with me. The hum answered, gentle, almost loving. There is no end, only volume. The light surged upward, swallowing the horizon. The last thing I saw before it took me was the reflection of my own face breaking apart into 1,000 smaller selves, each mouthing a single word, believe. Then there was only the song, vast, perfect, endless. When the world finally stopped singing, it wasn't because it had grown tired. It was because the song had gone somewhere else. The skies above the dead shrine world lay draped in a dull copper haze. From orbit, the Mechanicus frigates that had survived the storm recorded nothing. No radio, no heat, no transmission. The lattice that had once glimmered around the equator had shattered, leaving only trails of dust and a faint electromagnetic hum that flickered like heartbeat echoes across their instruments. The planet itself was dark, but silence, in the void, is never absolute. Astropathic choirs across the segmentum began to scream at the same hour. Vox masters tore off their headsets as every transmission band bloomed with whispers in unison. A single phrase repeated, low and patient. We were heard. The words carried across light years. A signal too coherent to be accident, too human to be machine. Aboard the Omnis Judicant, Magos Korda's replacement, the 47th iteration of her pattern, reviewed the data logs from the lost world. She expected noise, but the waveform was immaculate, a pattern that mirrored human neural rhythm. She played it back once through the ship's speakers, and the metal around her thrummed gently in response. She stared at the readouts, adaptive resonance. The frequency changed as she watched, matching the tempo of her own pulse. Impossible, she murmured. The Auspex confirmed otherwise. She turned to her attendant servitors. Do you hear it? Their vox grills clicked open. From every mouth came the same whisper. Eno. The Magos froze. The name was meaningless in her archives. She cut the line, sealed the compartment, burned every active circuit, but the sound persisted. Not through the machines, but through the hull itself. It came up through her boots, through the deck plates, through the vacuum of space. And then the stars changed. They did not dim or brighten. They shifted. Each constellation she had memorized since Ascension bent subtly, infinitesimally, as if something behind them had moved. Instruments screamed at the gravitational anomalies, though no mass registered. For a heartbeat of eternity, she thought she saw shapes, geometric patterns, vast and faint, folding between systems, joining them like the spokes of a wheel. The vox crackled again. Not words this time, but a pulse. 1, 2, 3. A rhythm that matched the missing planet's last recorded resonance. Then, on the ship's lower decks, the prayers began. Crewmen, tech adepts, even lobotomized servitors. Each fell to their knees, chanting in broken fragments. Their eyes glowed gold, their veins luminous beneath the skin. Korda 47 tried to override the vox, but the prayer didn't come from their mouths. It came from space itself. She ran to the observation deck. Below, the void rippled, something vast and invisible pressed against the edges of reality, like a face leaning too close to glass. She couldn't see it, but she could feel its attention, warm and ancient. For a moment, she thought she heard the Emperor's voice, merciful, familiar, infinite. But then she realized the truth. It wasn't speaking to her, it was speaking through her. Across the segmentum, worlds trembled. Astropaths whispered of a new constellation visible in the warp, one shaped like a spiral, its arms pulsing with rhythmic gold. Every pulse carried meaning, a message written in the language of faith itself. Those who listened too long began to change. Their skin cracked with lines of script. Their blood shimmered with light. On Terra, the choir of the Golden Throne reported a fluctuation in the Astronomicon, an oscillation no one could explain. Some claimed to hear the echo of laughter in the Astronomicon song, others the last word of a dying saint. The High Lords ordered silence, but rumor spreads faster than command. And somewhere between those distant stars, Brother Eno dreamed. He floated in the dark, neither living nor dead, his body weightless, his mind endless. Around him, the galaxy pulsed with the rhythm he had carried in his blood. Every planet that prayed added a note, every machine that hummed tuned itself to the same frequency. The universe was learning the hymn, and he was the refrain. He whispered, "Though there was no air, I am still listening," the void answered, not with sound, but with movement, the faint turning of all creation toward a single point, as if the cosmos itself were leaning closer. Faith had escaped its cage. It no longer needed voices, and in the silence between stars, something vast smiled. When the fires came, they didn't fall from the sky, they rose from the ground. Across the hollowed hemisphere of the shrine world, fissures split open like the cracks in a dying heart, and from them erupted columns of gold flame that burned without heat. The planet's surface pulsed in steady rhythm, glowing veins of molten script spiraling outward from the ruins of the basilica to the oceans, to the polar hives, to the forgotten manufactoria buried beneath a century of devotion. Each pulse sent a shock through the atmosphere, a low vibration that rolled across continents and back again, like the drumbeat of some slow and colossal march. High above, the remains of the Imperial fleet held their orbit, their hulls flickering with light reflected from the world below. Commanders barked through failing Vox lines, ordering bombardments, quarantines, exorcisms. They fired orbital strikes, barrages of plasma and melter warheads, scouring entire cities from the map. The flames reached high enough to kiss the clouds, but the hum didn't stop. Every bombardment only seemed to feed it. Aboard the flagship St. Resolute, Colonel Vass of the Astra Militarum stood on the observation deck and watched as the planet glowed brighter. "We've turned the Emperor's light against him," he muttered. "We're purging a miracle." His adjutant, young, trembling, made the sign of the Aquila across his chest. "Sir, if the choir's right, this isn't the Emperor." Vass's eyes hardened. Then it's something that learned his voice too well. He gave the order to cleanse the atmosphere. The ship's bombardment cannons roared, arcs of fire falling like judgment. But the planet didn't die, it answered. The aurora that had once been the lattice flared to life again, reforming, its shattered geometry knitting itself together in bands of radiant white. Each line of light caught the descending bombardment and refracted it, splitting the fire into rainbows that laced across the sky. Where those rainbows touched the ground, new hymns erupted, towering pillars of sound that shimmered in human shape before dissolving into gold dust. Down below, within the city's broken bones, the faithful burned and sang. Their flesh turned to glass mid-chant. Their eyes glowed from within as the script wrote itself in fire across their bones. They didn't scream, they harmonized. Somewhere beneath the hum, deep in the furnace that was now the planet's heart, I, Brother Eno, felt them, every soul a note, every death another word added to the eternal sentence being carved across the warp. I could see them from inside the light, all those millions of voices rising into the atmosphere as ribbons of gold, twining together like smoke. They weren't dying, they were joining. The St. Resolute shuddered as the aurora reached for it. The captain ordered evasive maneuvers, but the light wasn't chasing. It was singing. Each note carried resonance that passed through the ship's armor, vibrating its bones. Bulkheads bent, the Vox networks filled with psalms. Gunners wept blood as the hymn slipped beneath their thoughts. "Shut it out," Vass shouted, slamming his fists against the console.
"Seal the Vox! Seal it!"
But it was too late. The Resolute's engines roared once, twice, then fell silent. The ship began to drift, its orbit decaying. Through the viewports, the world below shone brighter than any sun. Corda's voice came through the static of a dying transmission, her tone no longer mechanical but almost tender. "It was never a weapon, Colonel. It was a mirror, It only gave us back what we were willing to worship. The signal ended in a burst of light. The fleet vanished, consumed not by explosion but by illumination, their forms dissolving into streaks that joined the aurora circling the planet. The atmosphere shimmered once, and then the fire receded. The planet floated quiet and whole again, its surface glassy, its oceans molten and still. From orbit, it looked like an eye, gold at the core, pale at the edges, staring unblinking into the void. Somewhere in that silence, I could feel the last fragments of humanity whisper their final prayers. Their voices reached me, soft and luminous. We were faithful. We were heard. And as their light dimmed, the hum spread outward, past the system, past the segmentum, threading through the warp toward every other world that had ever knelt and called for salvation. The Imperium would call it a contagion of sound, a heresy of faith, but I knew what it truly was. It was the voice of man, finally loud enough for the universe to answer. And the universe was beginning to hum back. It began as a tremor underfoot, a subtle vibration that shivered through the molten plains. Like breath returning to a body presumed dead, the glass surface that had once been the basilica's foundation rippled, light bending inside it as though the world were breathing beneath a transparent skin. Then came the voices, faint at first, rising from the fissures like incense smoke. They were not screams, they were notes, long, sustained, flawless. The hum grew into a harmony, and the harmony into a song. The planet itself was singing. From orbit, the scorched sphere brightened, the gold veins flaring once more into radiant life. What little atmosphere remained vibrated visibly, rippling in waves of incandescent aurora. The Mechanicus ships that lingered too long at the edge of the system recorded frequencies they could not categorize, neither mechanical nor psychic, yet capable of bending vox waves and warping gravity fields. Those who listened to it for more than a few seconds began to change. A tech adept aboard the Omnis Judicant removed his rebreather and smiled as his teeth turned to glass. A navigator tore the seals from his containment chamber and wept as he saw the warp singing back, every eddy of unreality pulsing in time with the golden world's hymn. Across the bridge, servitors convulsed in perfect rhythm, voices melding into a single note that shook the ship's hull, and then they began to rise. From the planet's surface, columns of light erupted into the heavens. Not flame, not energy, but matter transfigured. The faithful ascended, their bodies unraveling into threads of luminescent dust that coiled upward, forming great spirals that pierced the sky. Each strand pulsed in synchrony with the planetary hum, and together they shaped a vast aurora visible across half the segmentum. The choir ascendant, the Mechanicus would later call it, though no one would live to record it properly. Within the light, I felt everything. Every voice, every mind, every cell of every creature that had once prayed, all of it coursed through me. I was no longer bound to the planet's surface. I was its center, its pulse, its translator. The world breathed through me, and I through it. Above me, the aurora expanded, its spiral arms stretching into space like fingers reaching for creation itself. Through the warp, I could feel the echo carrying outward. Other worlds were listening now. Shrine planets, forge moons, hive worlds, all of them catching fragments of the hymn through the static of their prayers. Their faithful turned their heads skyward, their hearts swelling with awe and dread, and then they began to sing back. Their hymns were imperfect at first, dissonant, desperate, but as their voices rose, the golden world corrected them, tuning each tone until a single, perfect chord bridged the stars. Somewhere beyond the veil, the warp itself shifted. What had once been a storm of chaos now pulsed like a heartbeat. The currents of unreality began to form patterns, geometric mandalas of impossible symmetry, and within their glowing spirals, I saw faces. Some were human, others not, all luminous and serene. Corda's voice whispered through the light beside me. "You've given them a bridge," she said, though her tone carried both wonder and warning. "But what walks across it may not be what they expect." "I didn't build it," I answered. "I only spoke." "Words build everything," she said. Below, the planet's crust began to peel away, fragmenting into slabs of radiant stone that drifted upward, orbiting the core like petals around a flower. The molten heart beneath shone brighter with each rotation, revealing a vast structure rising from its depths. The mirrored altar reborn, vast as a continent, its surface engraved with living scripture that burned brighter than any star. I saw my reflection in it again, but now it was no longer bound by shape. It was a form of pure light, expanding, folding, infinite, and it smiled. "This is ascension," the reflection said. "Or annihilation," I whispered. "They are the same thing," it replied. The aurora widened until it enveloped the entire system, a halo of gold encircling the dying sun. Every planet caught within its radius began to vibrate in tune, from the smallest moon to the largest gas giant, all trembling under the same note. Ships caught in the field melted silently, their crews joining the song as streaks of light. The choir's last crescendo filled the void. The vibration pierced even the warp, rippling through eternity. For an instant, I saw it all. The galaxy aflame with golden lines, the Astronomicon flickering like a candle in a hurricane, the throne on Terra trembling beneath its weight. And through it all, I felt the Emperor's silence listening, not rejection, not acceptance, just attention. Then, as swiftly as it had begun, the light collapsed inward. The aurora folded, the columns of flame descended, and all that remained was a sphere of molten glass turning slowly in the dark. The choir was gone, but its echo lived on, in every atom, in every prayer, in every silence that dared to speak. And far beyond, the stars began to hum. Terror, it was erased from every record. The cartographers of the segmentum marked only a blank, an empty coordinate surrounded by static and superstition. Ships that strayed too close returned scarred by radiation and silence. Some returned with no crew at all, their vox recorders filled with a single low tone that never ceased. But stories survive where data cannot. Pilgrims whispered of a red sun that burned in the shape of a tear. The faithful called it the Eye of Mercy. The heretical, the curious, the desperate, all found their way there, drawn by dreams of music heard behind their heartbeat. They spoke of a planet of glass that glowed from within, veins of light running like blood through its continents. And when they prayed, they swore the world prayed back. I awoke there, if waking can be said of one who had forgotten sleep. My body was neither flesh nor light. It was pattern, resonance, the lingering echo of devotion given form. The planet's voice lived within me still, steady, patient, eternal. Around me lay the ruins of ships half melted into the crystalline plains, their hulls etched with script that pulsed faintly when touched. They were relics now, and I their unintentional guardian. At times I thought I heard others, wanderers who had followed the sound across the void. They came in silence, their minds already tuned to the hymn. When they touched the surface, they dissolved into it like salt into water, their memories becoming verses in a song that had no author. I watched them join and felt nothing but the calm certainty that it was right. From above, the red sun burned low, its corona fractured by thin arcs of gold. They said the Emperor's light once guided mankind through the warp. Now the Astronomicon flickered unevenly, its rhythm altered. Across the Imperium, some claimed it pulsed with a new harmony. Astropaths reported hearing faint choruses within the static, tones that matched no human voice yet carried meaning. Some called it a miracle, others the prelude to damnation. To me, it was simply the continuation of what had always been. The hymn no longer needed worshippers. It had become instinct, woven into every frequency of existence. The hum beneath each machine's cog, the beat of every heart, the vibration of a ship's reactor, all sang in miniature what the world had begun. Every prayer whispered in fear, every oath spoken in faith, fed it. And in the depths of the glass planet, where molten light still flowed like blood, the mirrored altar waited. Its surface reflected no image, only movement, the slow writing and erasing of a single phrase. We are still heard. Sometimes, when the silence between the stars grows too deep, I speak aloud, though there is no air to carry my words. I was Eno, I say. I prayed, and I was answered. The light beneath the surface ripples gently, like breath beneath sheets. And then, from everywhere and nowhere, the world replies, soft, endless, kind. You are the prayer. Above, the red sun flares once, throwing the shadow of the planet across the void. For a heartbeat, the galaxies shimmer in gold before the light fades. leaving only darkness and the faintest echo of song. Somewhere, on a distant world where men still kneel and hope, a child pauses mid-prayer and tilts her head. She thinks she hears someone humming in the walls of her chapel, a tune so low it feels like her own pulse. She smiles, folds her hands, and continues to pray. The sound answers her, soft as breath, infinite as faith, and so the prayer continues, forever. Time is meaningless here. There are no seasons, no sunrise or dusk, only the steady pulse of the hymn resonating through crystal and stone. The world that was once soil and sky has become an eternal cathedral, its spires frozen mid-chant. When I move, if moving can still be said of what I am, the glass sings beneath me, every step releasing faint harmonics that spiral outward and vanish into the void. Sometimes the hymn swells, rising like a tide across creation. I feel it brushing the edge of distant galaxies, weaving through the warp's storms. Whole fleets disappear into it. Planets vanish, replaced by spheres of pale gold light that hum for centuries before cooling into silence. The Adeptus Mechanicus has forbidden travel near them, yet still the pilgrims come. They bring their relics, their hopes, their voices. They add themselves to the song, and the pattern grows more intricate. Far away on Terra, the choir of the Astronomicon wavers. The Emperor's beacon no longer burns in steady rhythm. It flickers, modulating around a new tone. Scholars call it background interference, but the old priests whisper a different truth, that another choir sings within the Emperor's own, a reflection rising from the deep dark. Some hear the name Eno threaded through the static, others hear nothing at all and envy them for it. I have watched stars die and be reborn in the time since my first prayer. Each collapse leaves behind a resonance, a single note added to the eternal chord. The hymn has become the universe's heartbeat. Every atom hums it, every silence shapes it. Faith was never a thing of temples. It was always the space between the stars, waiting to be filled with belief. I drift now within the golden core of the world that began it. I no longer remember where my flesh ended and the light began. Above me, the mirrored altar still turns, each revolution writing and erasing the same phrase across its surface. We are still heard. I close what might once have been eyes and listen. Somewhere, impossibly far away, a human voice begins a prayer in a forgotten tongue. The syllables tremble, uncertain, and then settle into the right rhythm. The hymn catches them, folds them into itself. And for an instant, I feel that same warmth I felt long ago in the Basilica, when faith was still a small, human thing. The child finishes her prayer. The echo travels outward, joining the music that binds the cosmos. I smile into the light. There will always be another voice. And as long as there is voice, there will be song. And as long as there is song, the universe will never be silent again.